I'm Kendra, 32 years old, an interior designer based in Boston. 5 years of marriage to Marcus, a successful investment banker, taught me that appearances can be deceiving. At an exclusive country club dinner surrounded by his wealthy business associates, my husband publicly mocked me when I tried to join the conversation. "You really think I'd ever let you meet my rich business friends?" he laughed. Little did I know that humiliating moment would lead to a text from his best friend that would change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever felt underestimated by someone who was supposed to be your partner. I grew up in a small town outside Boston, raised by parents who worked multiple jobs to provide for our family. My father was a carpenter who took on extra weekend projects, and my mother worked as a school secretary while selling handmade crafts at local fairs. They taught me the value of hard work, honesty, and pursuing your dreams regardless of obstacles. From childhood, I was drawn to design, constantly rearranging my bedroom furniture and creating little spaces that felt special. My parents couldn't afford to send me to an expensive art school, but they supported me when I attended the State University for a degree in interior design. I worked 3 jobs to pay my tuition and graduated with honours, determined to make my mark in a competitive industry. My entry into the Boston design world wasn't glamorous. I started as an assistant at a small firm, learning everything I could, while taking evening courses in business management. Slowly, I built a portfolio and a modest client base, mostly middle-income families, wanting to refresh their homes without breaking the bank. I found joy in creating beautiful, functional spaces regardless of budget. I met Marcus at a charity gala, where I was helping decorate the venue as a volunteer. I certainly wasn't an attendee with tickets costing $2,000 each. He noticed me adjusting a floral arrangement and approached with a glass of champagne. "You've transformed this tired old ballroom," he said, his confidence immediately apparent. "I've attended events here for years, and it's never looked this good." Marcus was 35 years my senior, impeccably dressed in a custom suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his smile carried the assurance of someone who rarely heard the word no. When he asked for my number, I hesitated, assuming he was just flirting for the evening, but he persisted, mentioning he needed interior design consultation for his downtown apartment. Our first date wasn't at his apartment, but at an exclusive rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. He ordered wine without looking at prices and asked thoughtful questions about my career aspirations. When I shared my dream of having my own boutique design firm someday, he didn't dismiss it as unrealistic. Instead, he said, "With your talent and vision, I have no doubt you'll succeed." The whirlwind romance that followed was intoxicating. Weekend trips to New York for Broadway shows, sailing on his friend's yacht, dining at restaurants where reservations were booked months in advance. Marcus introduced me to a world I had only glimpsed from the outside, and he seemed genuinely proud to have me by his side. Looking back, the red flags were there, but they were disguised as care and protection. When he suggested I wear a particular dress to meet his colleagues, he framed it as wanting me to make the best impression. When he questioned whether I should take on certain clients, he called it concern for my work-life balance. Each time he made a decision without consulting me, it was because he didn't want to bother me with trivial matters. His proposal came 8 months after we met, with a diamond ring that made my friends gasp. My parents were cautiously supportive, my father pulling me aside to ask if this was truly what I wanted. "He seems like a good man," Dad said, "but remember who you are, Kendra. Don't lose yourself in his world." Our wedding was held at an historic estate with 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. I had envisioned something intimate, perhaps on a beach or in a garden, but Marcus insisted this was appropriate for someone of his position. I walked down the aisle in a designer gown he had selected, smiling at faces I didn't recognize, wondering why it felt more like a business function than a celebration of love. During the reception, I overheard a conversation between Marcus and one of his business associates. "She's quite the catch," the man said, eyeing me across the room. "Gorgeous and talented. A perfect addition to your portfolio." Marcus laughed and replied, "And she comes from good stock. Hard-working family, no drama. I did my due diligence." They clinked glasses as my stomach tightened. I told myself he was just speaking their language, that it didn't reflect how he truly saw me. After the honeymoon, we moved into Marcus's penthouse apartment. He suggested I could redecorate it within reason to showcase my talents. When I presented my ideas incorporating sustainable materials and local artisans, he frowned at the budget. "Let's be practical, Kendra. Your earthy aesthetic is charming for your clients, but this is where we entertain important people." It was my first glimpse into what would become a pattern. Marcus saw me as an accessory carefully selected to enhance his image, but not to express her own identity too boldly. During our first year of marriage, I focused on growing my business, renting a small studio space downtown. Marcus introduced me to some of his colleagues' wives, suggesting they might hire me for small projects. I was grateful but determined to build my reputation on merit rather than connections. I began to notice that Marcus kept his business and personal lives distinctly separate. While I met some of his associates at occasional dinners, he never truly integrated me into his professional world. His best friend from college, Thomas, was the exception. Thomas and his wife, Amelia, occasionally joined us for dinner, and I found their company refreshing. Unlike Marcus's other business friends, Thomas asked about my work with genuine interest and never spoke to me in the condescending tone I'd grown accustomed to from Marcus's circle. "You should see what Kendra did with the Miller's Lake House," Thomas once commented during dinner. "That feature wall is brilliant." Marcus looked surprised. "You saw her project." "Amelia and I drove by when they were hosting a barbecue," Thomas explained. "They invited us in for a tour and couldn't stop raving about the transformation." Later that night, Marcus questioned me about my relationship with Thomas and Amelia. "I didn't realize you were so chummy with them," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "We've only met them through you," I replied, confused. "They're just friendly. Thomas is my oldest friend, but he's also my business partner. It's important to maintain certain boundaries." I nodded, not fully understanding, but already learning when to push back and when to let things go. This, it seemed, was a moment to choose peace. As the months turned into years, I began to realize that Marcus saw my career as a charming hobby rather than a legitimate profession. When I talked about expanding my business, he would smile indulgently. "It's wonderful that you have something that keeps you busy," he'd say, as if I were discussing a knitting circle rather than a growing enterprise. 3 years into our marriage, I had built a modest but respectable client base and was finally earning consistent income. Marcus never acknowledged this achievement. Instead, he seemed increasingly irritated by my independence, making subtle comments about my schedule or questioning my business decisions. "Don't you think you're taking on too much?" he'd ask when I mentioned a new project. "I worry about you overextending yourself." His concern might have seemed loving to an outsider, but I recognized the pattern. Every step I took toward professional success was met with thinly veiled discouragement disguised as care. The dynamic between Marcus and me shifted subtly over time. What began as gentle guidance became controlling behavior. He would question my expenses despite the fact that I now covered most of my business costs. He would make comments about my clothing choices or suggest that certain topics weren't appropriate for me to discuss at social gatherings. "Politics and finance bore most people darling," he would say if I attempted to join conversations about the economy or current events. "Why don't you tell them about that lovely sunroom you designed for the Parkers?" I found myself being quietly shepherded into the role of decorative companion rather than equal partner. When I challenged this, Marcus would act bewildered. "I'm trying to help you shine in areas where you excel," he would insist. "Isn't that what supportive husbands do?" Despite his subtle undermining, my design business continued to grow. I specialized in creating spaces that were both beautiful and functional, with an emphasis on sustainable materials and locally crafted furnishings. My client reviews were glowing, and I began to receive referrals from past projects. A lifestyle blog featured one of my renovations, bringing a wave of new inquiries. Marcus's reaction to this minor publicity was telling. "Cute little write-up," he said, barely glancing at the article. "Just be careful not to let these things go to your head. Remember, these are small residential projects, not major commercial developments." His dismissal stung, but I had grown accustomed to his tactics. What I couldn't ignore, however, was his consistent pattern of keeping me separate from his business life. Whenever important industry events arose, Marcus would attend alone, offering vague explanations about limited tickets or strict guest lists. "It would be dreadfully boring for you," he would say. "Just investment bankers talking numbers all night. You'd be miserable." Or sometimes, "It's really just a working dinner. No spouses are attending." I would later discover photos on social media showing other partners at these supposedly spouse-free events. 4 years into our marriage, I secured my first commercial project, a boutique hotel in Back Bay that wanted a fresh, locally inspired redesign for their lobby and common areas. When I shared the news with Marcus, his response was tepid at best. "Hotels change their designs every few years," he said. "Don't get too invested." Despite his lack of enthusiasm, I poured myself into the project. The hotel owner was delighted with my concepts, and the completed renovation received attention from several design publications. This success led to conversations with a prominent tech company looking to redesign their Boston headquarters, a contract that would significantly elevate my firm's profile and financial stability. During this period, I had been developing a friendship with Thomas's wife, Amelia. Unlike the other women in Marcus's circle who seemed interested only in charity galas and vacation properties, Amelia had built her own successful literary agency. She understood the challenges of establishing professional credibility while married to a successful man. "They always assume you're playing business," she confided during a lunch date. "As if we're children with dollhouses rather than adults with ambitions." I found myself sharing more with Amelia than I had with anyone since marrying Marcus. I mentioned the tech company opportunity and my excitement about potentially securing such a significant client. "That's fantastic, Kendra," she said, genuinely pleased for me. "Have you told Marcus?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I want to wait until it's finalized. He tends to downplay these things." Amelia gave me a look of understanding that made me realize she might know more about Marcus's behavior than I had assumed. A week later, Marcus surprised me by mentioning an upcoming dinner at the Westfield Country Club, an exclusive venue where many of his business deals were negotiated over expensive whiskey. "Several key clients will be there," he said. "And some potential investors Thomas and I have been courting. I think it's time you joined one of these events." His sudden inclusion caught me off guard, but I was genuinely excited at the prospect of finally being welcomed into this part of his life. Perhaps my growing professional success had changed his perspective on my role in our marriage. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, already mentally cataloguing my wardrobe for something appropriate. "I look forward to meeting everyone. Just remember," Marcus added, his tone casual, but his eyes serious. "These are important relationships for my career. Keep the conversation light and pleasant." The night before the dinner, Marcus provided more specific guidance. "If anyone asks about your work, keep it brief," he advised as we prepared for bed. "These men aren't interested in color schemes and fabric samples." "My work involves more than decorating," I countered. "Business strategy, project management, client relations." "Of course," he said dismissively. Just read the room, Kendra, and please don't bring up that tech company project. It's not confirmed yet, and overstating your connections could be embarrassing. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach, the sensation that always accompanied Marcus's subtle belittling, but I was determined to make the most of this rare opportunity to engage with his professional world. Perhaps, if his colleagues saw my competence firsthand, Marcus would begin to view me differently as well. I understand, I said, hiding my disappointment behind a practiced smile. I'll follow your lead. The Westfield Country Club stood as a monument to old money and privilege, its colonial architecture and manicured grounds announcing to visitors that they were entering a world few would ever access. As our car pulled up to the entrance, a valet in a crisp uniform opened my door with a practiced smile. I had chosen a navy blue sheath dress that conveyed professionalism without being showy, paired with pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. Marcus gave me a quick once-over as we entered the marble-floored lobby. "You look appropriate," he said, which from him was high praise. He placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me through the space, as if I needed direction. "Remember, these people are the top of Boston's financial world. Just smile and let me handle the conversation." The private dining room was intimidating in its opulence, with dark wood paneling, oil paintings of stern-faced men from bygone eras, and a chandelier that cast a golden glow over the proceedings. 8 men in expensive suits stood in a loose circle, tumblers of amber liquid in hand. Thomas was the only one I recognized immediately. "Gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice taking on the confident timbre he reserved for professional settings. "May I introduce my wife, Kendra?" Wife. What followed was a blur of names and titles, each man nodding politely before returning to their conversations. I noticed Thomas watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between sympathy and curiosity. "Kendra, lovely to see you," he said, breaking away from the group to greet me properly. Amelia was disappointed she couldn't join us tonight. "Board meeting for one of her authors. Please give her my best," I replied, grateful for the friendly face. Thomas lowered his voice slightly. "Don't let this crowd intimidate you. Under the bespoke suits, they're just men worried about their portfolios and their golf handicaps." His attempt at putting me at ease was interrupted by Marcus, who appeared suddenly at my side. "Thomas Jackson was just asking about the Westlake proposal," he said, clearly pulling his friend away. To me, he added, "Why don't you get comfortable at the table, darling? We'll join shortly." I took my assigned seat, observing the dynamics of the group. There was a clear hierarchy, with an older man named Richard seeming to command the most deference. Marcus was attentive to his every comment, laughing too loudly at his jokes. I also noticed how Thomas, while clearly part of the inner circle, maintained a slight distance from the more boisterous behaviour. When everyone finally sat for dinner, I found myself between Marcus and a younger associate named Wesley. The conversation flowed around me, focused on market trends and property valuations. Whenever I attempted to join in, Marcus would subtly talk over me or redirect the conversation. "Kendra has such a unique perspective on these things," he would say, before immediately launching into his own opinion without actually letting me speak. The dinner service was impeccable, course after course of artfully presented food that I barely tasted as I grew increasingly uncomfortable with my role as silent ornament. The wine flowed freely, and as the meal progressed, the men grew louder, their conversation more unguarded. Wesley turned to me during a brief lull. "Thomas mentioned you're in design. What sort of projects do you work on?" Before I could answer, Marcus interjected. "Kendra does lovely residential work. Nothing you would find interesting, Wesley." Something in me snapped. Perhaps it was the accumulated weight of years of dismissal, or perhaps it was simply the right moment to stand my ground. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, I recently completed a redesign for the Harborview Hotel, and I'm in final discussions with Apex Technologies about their new headquarters. The table fell briefly silent. Wesley raised his eyebrows, looking genuinely impressed. Apex. They're doing interesting things in the market. A friend of mine heads their development team. For a moment, I felt a surge of validation, the simple pleasure of being acknowledged as a professional in my own right. It was short-lived. Marcus's laugh cut through the moment, too loud and sharp to be genuine. You really think I'd ever let you meet my rich business friends? He said, his tone making it clear he was playing for laughs from his colleagues. I don't want you asking them for help. Several of the men chuckled, though I noticed Thomas remained stone-faced. Wesley looked away, suddenly very interested in his wine glass. The room seemed to contract around me, the chandelier lights suddenly too bright, the laughter too loud. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in my chest, but something else rose with it. Dignity, resolve, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I smiled, not the practiced smile of a supportive wife, but the knowing smile of a woman who has finally seen the truth of her situation. Don't worry, I said, my voice clear and calm. You won't have to. I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten dessert, stood and walked away. Not rushing, not creating a scene, just removing myself with the quiet determination of someone who has made a decision. I found my way to the bar in the main club area, ordered a sparkling water, and sat alone, processing what had just happened. It wasn't just the public mockery, though. That was painful enough. It was the realization that this moment perfectly crystallized the dynamic of our entire marriage. I had been allowing myself to be diminished, accepting crumbs of respect, while hoping for a feast that would never be served. An hour passed before Marcus appeared. He didn't apologize or acknowledge what had happened. The car is waiting, he said simply, as if I had merely stepped out for air rather than experienced a pivotal moment in our relationship. The drive home was silent. Marcus stared straight ahead, occasionally checking his phone. I looked out the window at the passing lights of Boston, feeling strangely calm, despite the turmoil within. Sometimes clarity comes, not in dramatic revelations, but in quiet moments when you finally acknowledge what you've known all along. We arrived at our penthouse, the space that had never truly felt like my home, despite my attempts to infuse it with warmth. Marcus headed straight for his study without a word. I went to our bedroom, changing from my carefully chosen outfit into comfortable lounge clothes. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed different, somehow more resolved, less willing to compromise her worth for the approval of a man who would never truly see her value. My phone buzzed with a text notification. I expected it to be from Amelia, checking in after the dinner. Instead, I saw Thomas's name on the screen along with a message that would change everything. Kendra, I need to show you something. What Marcus did tonight was unforgivable, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. I've attached some documents you need to see. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry. The documents Thomas sent left me stunned, sitting on the edge of my bed, with my hand pressed against my mouth, to keep from making any sound that might alert Marcus in his study down the hall. The first attachment was a series of emails between Marcus and several potential clients who had considered hiring my design firm over the past 2 years. While I appreciate your interest in my wife's services, Marcus had written to a wealthy family who had contacted me about redesigning their vacation home. I should mention that she's currently overwhelmed with projects. Between us, her business is more of a passionate hobby than a professional operation. I'd be happy to recommend several more established designers who could handle a project of your scope. Similar messages appeared in exchanges with other potential clients, always with Marcus positioning himself as the concerned husband, looking out for their best interests by steering them away from my amateur business. In one particularly infuriating exchange, he had intercepted an inquiry from a boutique hotel chain that could have led to multiple lucrative projects. The second set of documents was even more disturbing. Financial records showed that Marcus had been taking significant loans from Thomas and other business associates over the past 18 months. The amounts were substantial, hundreds of thousands of dollars that weren't reflected in our joint accounts or evident in our lifestyle. The third attachment was a detailed statement from a private investigator Thomas had hired. It documented Marcus's regular visits to high-stakes gambling establishments in Atlantic City and online betting accounts showing massive losses. According to the investigator's report, Marcus had accumulated gambling debts approaching $2 million, hidden through a complex web of loans and shell accounts. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Marcus had been using my growing design business as collateral for some of these loans, claiming partial ownership due to our marriage, despite the fact that I had built the company entirely with my own savings and had kept our finances largely separate at Marcus's insistence. As I scrolled through document after document, a text from Thomas appeared. Marcus has been doing this for years. I've known for months but stayed silent out of misguided loyalty. When I saw how he treated you tonight, I couldn't be complicit anymore. Amelia has been urging me to tell you. She says you deserve to know who you're really married to. I sat motionless, trying to process this avalanche of betrayal. It wasn't just that Marcus had undermined my business or accumulated secret debt. It was the calculated nature of his deception, the years of making me doubt myself while he actively sabotaged my success. Every concerned comment about my business capabilities, every protective gesture of keeping me from his professional circle suddenly appeared in its true light, a systematic campaign to keep me dependent and diminished. Another message from Thomas appeared. There's more. Marcus has been talking to Richard about using your client list and portfolio to launch a high-end design firm under his own management, essentially taking over your business once it's established enough to be profitable. They've already approached some of your clients. I felt a cold fury replacing the shock. The audacity of it was almost impressive, a long con where I was both mark and unwitting accomplice. Throughout our marriage, I had maintained separate accounts for my business, insisting on financial independence, despite Marcus's subtle pressure to consolidate. That decision now seemed providential rather than merely prudent. I spent hours that night researching our legal and financial entanglements. Marcus had always handled the major financial decisions in our marriage, a role I had ceded partly out of trust and partly due to his persistent suggestion that his expertise in finance made him naturally better suited to manage our affairs. Now I discovered hidden accounts properties I wasn't aware we owned, and investment portfolios that had never been mentioned. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that Marcus had been preparing for contingencies that included separating his assets from mine while maintaining access to my growing business. At 3 a.m, I received another text from Thomas. Are you okay? Do you need a place to stay tonight? Amelia and I have a guest room ready if you need to leave immediately. I'm still processing, I replied, but thank you. I might need to take you up on that offer soon. Whatever you decide, he wrote back, we'll support you. This isn't just about friendship. What Marcus has been doing is wrong on every level. As dawn broke over Boston, I had made my decision. I would confront Marcus, but not until I had protected myself as much as possible. The woman who had walked away from that dinner table was done being manipulated and undermined. The new day would bring the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. Marcus returned from work the following evening to find me sitting at our dining table, a neat stack of printed documents before me, my laptop open to display more. He loosened his tie, a habitual gesture that once seemed casually masculine, but now struck me as theatrical part of the persona he had crafted so carefully. Working late, he asked, heading for the bar cart to pour his usual scotch. I thought you had that meeting with the tech company tomorrow. Shouldn't you be preparing? I rescheduled. I said, my voice calmer than I expected. Something more urgent came up. He turned glass in hand, finally registering my expression, and the papers spread before me. A flicker of wariness crossed his face before his practiced smile returned. What's all this tax season isn't for months? Sit down, Marcus. The authority in my tone surprised us both. He hesitated, then complied, placing his glass on the table and easing into the chair across from me. I know everything, I said, simply pushing the first document toward him. The sabotage of my business, the gambling debts, the loans from Thomas and your other associates, your plans to take over my client relationships. His expression shifted from confusion to denial to calculation, all in the space of seconds. It was fascinating to watch, like seeing an actor cycle through emotions during an audition. What are you talking about? He attempted, his voice pitched to convey bewilderment. Where did you get these papers? Has someone been feeding you lies about me? Thomas sent them, I said. But they're not lies, are they? These are your emails, Marcus. Your signature on these loan documents. Your visits to casinos documented with dates, times, and losses. He stiffened at the mention of Thomas' anger flashing in his eyes. Thomas had no right to interfere in our marriage. Whatever he showed you is being misinterpreted or taken out of context. The context seems pretty clear, I countered, opening another folder. Here's you telling the Andersons that my business is a hobby operation when they inquired about hiring me. Here's you and Richard discussing how to leverage my portfolio once, and I quote, she's built enough of a reputation to be worth acquiring. Marcus shifted tactics, his expression softening into one of concern. Kendra, you're not seeing the full picture. Yes, I've protected some clients from overcommitting to your business before you were ready. That was for your benefit. You were just starting out, and I didn't want you overwhelmed or damaging your reputation by taking on more than you could handle. And the gambling, I asked, my voice steady. The $2 million in debt, was that for my benefit too? His face hardened. Everyone has vices. Mine is occasionally enjoying games of chance. I've made some losses, but I've also had significant wins. The overall picture is nothing like what you're suggesting. The overall picture is that you've been leading a double life, I said, playing the successful, supportive husband while systematically undermining my career and putting us both at financial risk. Marcus's attempt at reasonable discussion began to fracture. You're being hysterical, he snapped. This is exactly why I've had to manage things without burdening you. You don't understand the complexities of high finance and risk management. I understand betrayal, I replied. I understand that you've been actively sabotaging my career while presenting yourself as my biggest supporter. I understand that you've put both of us in jeopardy with your gambling addiction. The word addiction triggered something in him. He slammed his hand on the table, causing the scotch to slosh in his glass. Don't use that word, I don't have an addiction. I have calculated entertainment expenses that sometimes exceed projections. The clinical financial terminology would have been almost comical if the situation weren't so painful. This was the real Marcus, emerging, the one who viewed everything, including our marriage, as a transaction to be managed for maximum personal benefit. What exactly do you want, Kendra? He demanded. Money? Is that why you're creating this drama? Because I can write you a check right now if it will end this ridiculous conversation. I want a divorce, I said simply, and I want you to stay away from my business and my clients. His laugh was cold. A divorce after everything I've given you, the lifestyle, the connections, the legitimacy. You were decorating middle-class living rooms when I found you. Without me, you'd still be hanging curtains in suburbia. Without you actively sabotaging me, I might have built an even more successful business, I countered. And I'd rather hang curtains in suburbia than live another day in a marriage built on lies. Marcus's face contorted with anger, the mask of civilized concern completely discarded. You ungrateful bitch! You think you can just walk away? That business of yours exists because of my connections, my world. One word from me, and no one in Boston with any influence will hire you. Is that what you told yourself to justify undermining me all these years? I asked. That I owed you, that my success belonged to you. Everything you have is because of me, he shouted, standing suddenly. And don't think Thomas will save you. Once I'm finished explaining how you seduced him to steal business information, his marriage will be in shambles and your supposed friendship will be toxic. No one betrays me without consequences. There it was, the true face of the man I had married, not the charming, successful banker who had swept me off my feet, but a manipulative, controlling man who viewed relationships as power plays and people as assets to be managed or liabilities to be controlled. I'm not afraid of you, Marcus, I said, standing as well. Not anymore. You can threaten and bluster all you want, but the documents speak for themselves. I have evidence of your financial misconduct, your interference with my business and your gambling debts. Do you really want all of that becoming public record in a contentious divorce? The mention of public exposure gave him pause. Marcus had always been obsessed with his reputation, the carefully constructed image of success and propriety he presented to the world. You wouldn't dare, he said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Try me, I replied. I'm not the same woman you married, Marcus. I'm certainly not the same woman you humiliated last night. That woman is gone. The one standing in front of you now isn't afraid of a fight. We stared at each other across the table, the years of our marriage hanging between us, dissolving into the reality of who we had become to each other, adversaries, where once we had been partners. You're making a terrible mistake, he finally said, his voice low and controlled once more. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is not seeing you clearly sooner, I replied. Marcus grabbed his jacket and stalked toward the door. I need to clear my head. When I come back, I expect you to be reasonable. We can discuss terms that benefit us both. After he left, I immediately began packing essentials. I knew Marcus well enough to understand that his retreat was tactical, not emotional. He would return with a new strategy to maintain control, and I had no intention of being present for that attempt. I called Amelia, who answered immediately despite the late hour. Thomas told me he sent the documents, she said without preamble. Are you okay? I just told Marcus I want a divorce, I replied, my voice finally betraying a tremor. He didn't take it well. Where is he now? He left to clear his head, which probably means he's calling Richard or his other allies to strategize. Pack a bag, Amelia said firmly. The guest room is ready. You shouldn't be alone right now. As I placed clothing and important documents into a suitcase, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the marriage I had thought I had, anger at the years of manipulation, but also, surprisingly, a sense of liberation. The confrontation had confirmed what I had begun to recognize at the country club. I deserved better than a relationship built on deception and control. Within an hour, I was in a rideshare heading to Thomas and Amelia's brownstone in Beacon Hill, leaving behind the penthouse that had never truly felt like home. The night air felt cleaner somehow, each breath a step toward a future I would shape on my own terms. The following weeks unfolded with the intensity and purpose of a military campaign. The morning after leaving the penthouse, I met with Patricia Sullivan, a divorce attorney specializing in high-conflict cases involving financial deception. Thomas had made the introduction, and her reputation for being both ethical and formidable preceded her. Patricia's office projected calm competence with views of Boston Harbor that seemed to emphasize the perspective she brought to complicated situations. Based on what you've shown me, she said after reviewing the documents Thomas had provided, We have a strong case for financial misconduct and what could legally be considered economic abuse. The attempts to interfere with your business are particularly troubling from both a marital and business law perspective. What should I expect? I asked. Marcus won't make this easy. No, he won't, she agreed candidly. Men like your husband are accustomed to controlling narratives and outcomes. When that control is threatened, they typically respond with escalation before considering compromise. Her prediction proved accurate. Within days, Marcus launched a multi-pronged offensive. First came the charm offensive, flowers delivered to Amelia and Thomas's home with notes expressing concern for my fragile emotional state and urging me to come home so we can work through this misunderstanding. When that failed, he shifted to financial pressure, attempting to freeze our joint accounts and contacting my business's landlord to suggest I might not be able to make rent. Fortunately, Patricia had anticipated these moves, and we had already taken protective measures for both personal and business finances. The third phase was perhaps the most predictable but still painful character assassination. Marcus began telling mutual acquaintances that I was having a breakdown, possibly due to medication issues or work stress. To some, he hinted that my close relationship with Thomas and Amelia suggested more than friendship, a thinly veiled implication of infidelity. This is the extinction burst, Patricia explained during one of our strategy sessions. He's trying everything that's worked in the past to regain control. When none of it succeeds, he'll eventually move to negotiation, but only after realizing that his traditional tactics have failed. Meanwhile, Thomas and Amelia proved to be more than just generous hosts. Thomas provided a formal statement documenting Marcus's pattern of financial misconduct and his attempts to interfere with my business relationships. This statement, coming from Marcus's longtime friend and business partner, carried significant weight. He'll never forgive me, Thomas acknowledged when we discussed the potential fallout. But I can't keep pretending I don't see who he really is. The Marcus I knew in college is long gone, replaced by someone I barely recognize. But more surprising was the quiet support that emerged from unexpected quarters. Wesley, the younger associate from the country club dinner, reached out through my business website. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up that night. His message read, "What Marcus did was unconscionable and my silence made me complicit. If you need a character reference or business endorsement during this difficult time, I'd be honored to provide one." Even as Marcus attempted to poison my professional relationships, I remained focused on securing my most important client to date, the Apex Technologies headquarters redesign. The initial meeting had been postponed due to the personal chaos, but I was determined not to let Marcus's behavior cost me this opportunity. Preparing for the presentation became my sanctuary, the creative work providing respite from legal strategies and emotional processing. I poured every ounce of my design expertise into the concepts, creating spaces that would reflect Apex's innovative culture while fostering collaboration and well-being for their employees. The morning of the presentation, I received an unexpected call from Richard, the senior partner who had commanded such deference at the country club dinner. "Kendra," he began without preamble. "I understand you're meeting with Apex today. I thought you should know that Marcus has been in touch with their CFO, suggesting that your personal situation might impact your ability to deliver on schedule." My heart sank. Marcus knew exactly how important this client was to me, and he was deliberately targeting this relationship. "Thank you for the information," I said, keeping my voice steady. "May I ask why you're telling me this?" A pause. "Let's just say that Marcus's recent behavior has raised questions about his judgment. Not all of us appreciate his methods, regardless of our business relationships. It was hardly a declaration of support, but the warning itself suggested that not everyone in Marcus's circle was willing to participate in his vendetta. The Apex presentation proceeded as scheduled, and I addressed the potential concern directly at the outset. Before we discussed designs, I told the executive team, "I want to acknowledge that I'm currently going through a divorce. You may hear rumours or receive communications suggesting this will affect my work. I want to assure you that my personal and professional lives are separate. My business is financially independent, and this project would receive my full attention and commitment." The directness appeared to impress them, and the subsequent presentation of my design concepts generated genuine enthusiasm. By the end of the meeting, we were discussing timeline and budget details, clear indicators of serious interest. As I left the Apex offices, I received a text from Marcus. "Heard your meeting went well. Remember who introduced you to the design world. I can take away what I gave you." Instead of responding, I forwarded the message to Patricia, adding it to the growing documentation of his attempts at intimidation and business interference. The divorce proceedings formally began with the filing of papers and the serving of Marcus at his office, a venue he had specifically asked us to avoid. Patricia had insisted on the workplace service, however, noting that it established a tone that we would not be accommodating his preferences at the expense of our strategy. "You need to show strength from the beginning," she advised. "Men like Marcus respect power even as they resent it in women." Marcus's initial legal response was as aggressive as expected, with claims to partial ownership of my design firm based on contributions of social and business capital during our marriage. His lawyer, a shark-like man named Gerald Winters, was known for scorched-earth divorce tactics that left both parties financially and emotionally depleted. "He's hoping you'll be intimidated into a quick, unfavourable settlement," Patricia observed after our first procedural hearing. "He doesn't realise yet that you're prepared for a marathon, not a sprint." Throughout this period, I maintained a rigorous focus on my business, refusing to let the personal drama affect my professional commitments. The discipline paid off when Apex officially signed a contract for their headquarters redesign, a project that would establish my firm at a new level within the Boston design community. The news apparently reached Marcus quickly, as his next move demonstrated a new level of desperation. He appeared unannounced at a networking event where I was scheduled to speak about sustainable design practices. In front of several industry colleagues, he attempted to create a scene, his voice loud enough to draw attention, but controlled enough to seem concerned, rather than confrontational. "Kendra, please, we need to talk," he said, positioning himself directly in my path. "You're not thinking clearly about the consequences of your actions. I'm worried about you." Several years ago, this public performance of the concerned husband might have flustered me, might have made me question my own perceptions and decisions. But the woman standing before him now was not the same one he had married. This version of Kendra recognized the manipulation for exactly what it was. "This isn't the time or place, Marcus," I said calmly. "My attorney will be happy to schedule a meeting if you have something to discuss related to our divorce proceedings." "This isn't about lawyers," he insisted, his voice taking on the wounded tone he had perfected for situations requiring sympathy. "This is about us, about the life we built together. You're throwing away 5 years based on a misunderstanding." I noticed several people watching the interaction, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Among them was a reporter from a local design publication who had planned to interview me after my presentation. "There's no misunderstanding," I said, my voice clear and steady, "and this conversation is over." I moved to step around him, but he caught my arm, his grip firm, but not overtly aggressive, just enough to halt my movement to assert control in a way that could be interpreted as emotional rather than physical. "You're not walking away from me again," he said, his voice lower now. "Not until you listen to reason." What happened next would later be described in the reporter's article as a masterclass in professional boundary setting. I did not raise my voice or create a scene to match his. Instead, I looked directly at his hand on my arm, then back to his face. "Remove your hand," I said, each word distinct and calm, "or I will call security and file a report for physical harassment." "Your choice, Marcus." The moment stretched between us, a public test of wills. Then awareness of the watching eyes seemed to penetrate his focus, and he released my arm. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow, a line delivered by an actor who no longer believed in the script. "It was over the moment you decided I was an asset rather than a partner," I replied. "Goodbye, Marcus." I proceeded to the stage and delivered my presentation on sustainable design innovations without a single reference to the confrontation. The reporter's subsequent article mentioned the incident briefly, but focused primarily on my design philosophy and upcoming projects, including the Apex headquarters. The public failure of his intimidation attempt marked a turning point in Marcus's approach. His lawyer contacted Patricia the following week to discuss settlement terms, the first indication that he might be realizing the fight would not be easily won. The negotiations were still contentious, with Marcus initially demanding compensation for his contributions to my business success. But his position weakened considerably when Thomas provided additional documentation of Marcus's attempts to leverage my business as collateral for his gambling debts, a clear breach of fiduciary duty in a marriage. 6 months after that fateful night at the country club, the divorce was finalized with terms that protected my business completely and divided our marital assets according to actual contribution rather than Marcus's inflated claims of support. The settlement included a non-disparagement clause that prevented him from interfering with my professional relationships, with significant financial penalties for violations. As I signed the final papers in Patricia's office, I felt neither triumph nor sadness, but rather a quiet acknowledgement that one chapter of my life had closed and another had already begun. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked as we completed the last of the paperwork. I considered the question carefully. "Free," I finally said, "and ready for whatever comes next." The year following my divorce from Marcus became a period of profound rebuilding, not just of my external circumstances, but of my internal landscape as well. The first priority was establishing a new home, a space that would be entirely mine in both legal and emotional terms. I found a modest but charming apartment in Southend, not far from my studio. The building had been converted from an old textile factory, with exposed brick walls and large windows that flooded the rooms with natural light. Unlike the sleek, impersonal penthouse, Marcus had preferred this space, invited warmth and creativity. "It suits you," Amelia said when she helped me move in. "It feels like a place where real living happens, not just a showcase." Furnishing the apartment became a therapeutic exercise, each piece chosen for meaning rather than status. I incorporated works from local artisans I had connected with through my design business, creating a home that told the story of my emerging community rather than my bank account. The financial aspects of starting over were challenging but not insurmountable. The divorce settlement had been fair, largely thanks to Thomas's testimony and Patricia's tenacious advocacy. I had maintained separate accounts for my business throughout the marriage, a decision that now seemed almost prescient. Still, there were adjustments. I had become accustomed to a certain lifestyle during my years with Marcus. Now I found myself creating budgets, making conscious choices about expenses, and learning the difference between luxury and comfort. The process was occasionally humbling, but ultimately empowering. Each financial decision, a small reclamation of independence. Building a credit history in my own name became a priority, another step in establishing financial autonomy. Marcus had always insisted on managing our major financial decisions, subtly discouraging me from participating actively in investments or large purchases. Reversing this pattern meant educating myself about financial management and finding advisors who treated me with respect rather than condescension. The professional landscape proved more complex to navigate than the personal one. Despite the non-disparagement clause in our divorce agreement, Marcus found subtle ways to cast shadows on my reputation within certain circles. Never anything directly actionable, just quiet insinuations about personal instability or business inexperience when my name arose in conversations with potential clients from his world. Rather than engage in a counteroffensive, I focused on letting my work speak for itself. The Apex Technologies headquarters became my calling card, a project that garnered attention not just for its aesthetic appeal, but for its innovative approach to creating workspaces that enhanced productivity and well-being. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Boston Home magazine featured the Apex project in a cover story titled "The Future of Work: How Kendra Mitchell is Reshaping Corporate Spaces." The article highlighted not just the design elements, but the collaborative process I had developed with clients, emphasizing function and human experience alongside visual appeal. The publicity led to new opportunities, including consultation requests from companies outside Boston. My client base expanded beyond the local market, reducing the impact of any lingering influence Marcus might have in our immediate community. Throughout this period of professional growth, I maintained the friendship that had become an unexpected gift from my failed marriage. Thomas and Amelia remained steadfast supporters, though we all recognized the need for some distance as they navigated the complex aftermath of Thomas's break with Marcus in the business world. "He's still furious," Thomas confided during a rare dinner together 6 months after the divorce. "The partnership is dissolving, which was inevitable, but he's making it as difficult as possible." "I never wanted to come between you," I said, feeling a pang of guilt despite knowing I hadn't created the situation. "You didn't," Thomas assured me. "Marcus did that all by himself. Some friendships aren't meant to last a lifetime, just long enough to teach us something important." Another healing aspect of this period was reconciling with my parents, whom Marcus had gradually isolated me from during our marriage. He had never been openly hostile toward them, but had created subtle barriers through scheduling conflicts, veiled comments about their simple lifestyle, and the constant implication that my family background was something to overcome rather than embrace. My first visit home after the divorce was emotional for all of us. My father, never one to express feelings directly, simply held me in a long embrace when I arrived, while my mother watched with tears in her eyes. "We missed you," was all he said, but the words contained volumes. Later that evening, sitting on the back porch of their modest home, my mother addressed what they had observed, but never confronted. "We knew something wasn't right," she said. "The way you changed around him, becoming smaller somehow, but we were afraid if we pushed too hard, he'd cut us off completely." "I wouldn't have let that happen," I protested, though without complete conviction. The truth was, I had allowed Marcus to influence many aspects of my life, including the frequency and quality of family connections. "Maybe not intentionally," my father said gently, "but that kind of control happens in inches, not miles. We've seen it before." Their understanding without judgment was a balm I hadn't known I needed. We established a new rhythm of regular visits and calls, rebuilding the foundation that had always been there beneath the years of distance. The psychological healing took longer than the practical rebuilding. I began working with the therapist who specialized in recovery from controlling relationships, learning to identify the patterns that had allowed me to accept diminishment and manipulation. "What we're really talking about is reclaiming your intuition," Dr. Landon explained during one particularly insightful session. "You knew things weren't right long before you had evidence. The goal is to honor those internal warnings earlier." Through this work, I began to recognize how Marcus had systematically undermined my confidence while presenting himself as supportive. The helpful suggestions that were actually criticism, the protection that was actually control, the guidance that was actually diminishment. Each revelation was painful but ultimately liberating, creating space for new patterns of self-trust and boundary setting. The therapy also helped me navigate the complicated emotions around Thomas and Amelia's role in my awakening. While profoundly grateful for their intervention, I sometimes struggled with questions about timing and responsibility. Why didn't they tell me sooner? I asked Dr. Landon during a difficult session. They watched him undermine me for years. That's a fair question, she acknowledged. One you might want to discuss with them directly when you're ready. Remember, though, people caught in the orbit of controlling personalities often struggle with when and how to intervene. Their hesitation doesn't diminish the value of their eventual action. When I finally broached the subject with Thomas and Amelia over dinner at their home, their response was illuminating. We questioned ourselves constantly, Amelia admitted. Was it our place to intervene? Were we misinterpreting? Would telling you make things worse if you weren't ready to hear it? I was particularly conflicted, Thomas added. I'd known Marcus since college, seen him at his best and worst. There's a special kind of denial that happens when someone you've loved as a friend changes into someone you don't recognize or respect. Their honesty deepened rather than damaged our friendship, adding another layer of healing to the ongoing process of recovery. By the 1-year anniversary of my divorce, my design firm had grown to include 2 junior designers and a project manager. We had completed the Apex headquarters to widespread acclaim and secured contracts with 3 additional technology companies looking to reimagine their workspaces in the post-pandemic environment. The business success was gratifying, but the personal growth felt more significant. I had learned to trust my judgment to set and maintain boundaries, and to recognize my worth independent of external validation. The woman who had walked away from that country club table had become someone I was proud to be, someone who would never again accept being made to feel small for another's comfort. Almost exactly 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I encountered Marcus at an industry event, a showcase of innovative design concepts for urban living. I had been invited as a featured designer presenting concepts for sustainable apartment renovations that maximized space and minimized environmental impact. I spotted him across the exhibition hall talking with a small group of investors. He looked essentially the same, still impeccably dressed and confident in his presentation. But something had changed in how I perceived him. Where once I had seen sophistication and assurance, I now recognized rigidity and performance, a man playing a part rather than living authentically. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded space. A year earlier, such an encounter might have filled me with anxiety or lingering hurt. Now I felt only a calm acknowledgement of our shared past and separate futures. Later, as I was discussing material sources with a potential client, I sensed someone approaching from behind. Turning, I found Marcus standing there, his expression carefully neutral. "Your presentation was impressive," he said, his tone formal. "The industry seems to be embracing your vision." "Thank you," I replied simply, neither encouraging nor rejecting the overture. An awkward silence followed, both of us aware of the watching eyes of mutual acquaintances nearby. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "I heard your firm is expanding, taking on larger commercial projects now." "Yes," I confirmed. "We've found our niche in creating workspaces that prioritize well-being alongside functionality." He nodded, seemingly searching for words. An unusual state for a man who had always commanded conversation. "I underestimated you," he finally said. "That was my mistake." The statement hung between us, not quite an apology, but perhaps the closest approximation his pride would allow. It was, I agreed, neither accusatory nor forgiving, simply acknowledging the truth. Another pause, then a slight incline of his head before he turned and walked away, back toward his group of associates. The encounter lasted less than 2 minutes, but felt like the closing of a circle, the final resolution of a story that had occupied 5 years of my life. As I watched him go, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The naive young designer who had been dazzled by wealth and status had been replaced by a woman who understood her own value and the importance of authentic connection. The painful lessons of my marriage had ultimately led to a life more aligned with my true self than I could have imagined on that night at the country club. Looking back, I realized that night wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the end of a beginning that was never truly mine. Today, I design spaces that bring genuine comfort and joy, not just impressive facades. And I've designed my life the same way, built on a foundation of self-worth that no one can ever again diminish or control. The path hasn't been easy, but it has been mine to walk, each step a choice made with increasing confidence and clarity. In the architecture of a life, as in the design of any space, the most important element isn't how it looks to others, but how it feels to those who dwell within it. My space now feels like freedom, like possibility, like home. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after discovering someone wasn't who you thought they were? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. And remember, sometimes walking away is the most powerful step you can take. Thank you for listening, and may you always honor your own worth, even when others fail to see it.